Hi folks, welcome back. So here is the Honda 200M. Let's call it a 1984, 85, whatever you would like. This has a seized. Remember, I went to pull the recoil. This is part 2, and it appeared to be seized. The engine appeared to be seized. So what I did is, first thing I did is I took off the recoil starter. Easy enough to do, just a few bolts, 10 millimeters, piece of cake. We could all get the recoil starter off. And I went to turn the starter basket, pulley, whatever you would like to call this, and it'll turn backwards, but you hear that clicking, but it wouldn't turn forward. It locks when it's time to go forward. So, and it will turn backwards a couple complete RPMs. So the piston does not appear to be seized, which is good news. So that's the first thing I did. And before I took this cover off, the next thing I did was back the starter out. To get the starter loose, very easy. You take off the 4 bolts that hold the starter bracket on, and then you just put a piece of wood against the starter and you tap it out. There's an O-ring here, I think you guys are seeing it, and it seals fairly well, so you got to kind of tap it backwards. I also put the jump pack to the starter, and the starter turns around, not a problem. So I'm like going, this is an interesting situation. What do I have going on here? So I took this off next. 1, 2, 3, and then there's 3 bolts on the inside to get it loose. So 6 bolts, got the cover off, and it came off very easily. And quite honestly, came off perhaps a little too easily. I'm wondering if somebody had not been in here already. So I did that, and I took the starter gears out of here. And you want to be very careful about these shims. If you don't have them on here, if you lose them, eventually the gears could put wear on your case, and then, you know, start to wobble or put a lot of metal into your engine. So you really kind of want to keep an eye on these. And generally speaking, they are on both sides of a shaft, right? So you got this shaft, and you see you got one on the bottom, and then you would have one on the top up against this case also. So you should kind of be looking for 4 of those if nobody's been in there. The other problem you can have with those shims is if you drop them into the engine there, not a good thing. So keep an eye on those. Anyway, so there was a gear here, and I took it off, and I went to turn it. It's doing the same thing. So I took the that thing with the gears on it, right? The gear teeth on it. That's actually the starter clutch. And what that does is when you turn the starter, it turns over the engine the proper direction. And once it's running, that no longer engages. It's slipping, so to speak, or spinning freely. That way you don't have your starter spinning at 1,000,000 RPM when you gun the engine up to 5,000, right? Because you can see it's geared up pretty tall. So I took all that out, and it's still doing it. But I don't know if you guys could see all the way in there. This right there, that's the timing chain, the engine timing chain. And let me see if I can see how it's kind of shaking. And then when I go to turn it in the proper direction, it won't let me turn. So what it's basically telling me is, for some reason, the engine is not able to turn over the valve chain. It's very much jump time, especially with the way I've turned it over a bunch. So it's jump time, and I'm not exactly sure why at this point. The next step is to get up into the valve region here. This cover comes off and you'll see the pulse generator and the magnet and the advance. That's all on this side. And then if you take the next level of cover off, you have access to the timing gears and so forth. More or less at this point, this engine went from hopeful, and by hopeful, you know, you kind of hope that there's something wrong with the starter clutch, which would just mean taking the flywheel off and replacing it, because the starter clutch is kind of part of the back of the flywheel. And I have several engines available to get that part from, but that does not appear to be my issue. That does not appear to be the problem. It appears as if this engine probably jump time, and if I had to guess, I'm kind of rocking in my head back and forth between how much do I want to take this engine apart, because once I take it apart, it's going to be kind of a large bunch of pieces. Or if I just want, I have another engine to put on here, and I could just put this engine aside and basically put a little label on it that says valve issues, and I have this engine ready to go right on, right? It's just a matter of bolting it right up. So you know, I could get it all running on that guy without, and worry about tearing this engine down at a future time, particularly to get the head off. I gotta pull this mount, the carburetor, the exhaust manifold. At that point, the engine's most of the way out anyway. I just have another 4 long bolts after that, and the engine's out. Then I can put the new one right in. So I think at this point, I'm going to end this series with just 2 videos. And if you bought this bike as a parts bike, or if you bought this bike because you know you have a spare engine, you're not in too bad a condition. If you bought this bike and paid $300-400 for it, and you do not have a spare engine, typically you can get a 200S engine. I think a 200S would go right on here without too much trouble. Engine or 200M engine, you're typically looking at between $200 and $500. So if you already have $300 into it, you're not in a great shape, because you can buy a running one that's a little prettier than this, with the right wheels and tires and so forth, for less money than that. If you're in it for $150 and you manage to get an engine, you know, for another $250, you're at $400. You're not in too bad a condition, right? So it all depends. It all depends. For $400, if you can ride this thing, you're in pretty decent shape, right? It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but you got a good solid running bike for that kind of money. But if you know, once again, if you already have $300 out and you got to go another $500 to get an engine on it, $800, you know, tires And once again, it's not very pretty. You can buy a nice one for $800. So anyway, a lot of times, quite honestly, this is what you find with them. If you're buying something that's seized, there's probably a really good possibility that the engine is done. Maybe not, but probably it's done. All right, folks. I want to thank you all for watching and commenting and subscribing. Please remember to keep your feet down, keep your heads up, and get out there and enjoy each and every one of your days. Bye now, folks.